Story time about how I found out I had a stalker. This gets really scary, so let's start. I was living by myself in 2016 in Los Angeles. I was working a lot in commercials and modeling and doing a bunch of stuff, and I had my own little studio apartment on Melrose Avenue. It was super cute and I loved it. I felt very safe. 2 months into the lease, I booked some acting work, so I had to be on set for 3 days in a row, and I stayed in a hotel while I was on set, so I actually didn't get to go home. When I finally got home, I noticed that my fridge had moved about 2 feet to the right, which is very noticeable because that's a large space to cover, and I noticed that my fridge was just in a different place. So I called the landlord and asked her if they had to come into my apartment for some reason, and she said no. I didn't want to freak out, so I just tried to ignore it, and I thought, no one's coming into my apartment, that would be insane. For the next couple of days, I kept trying to justify how my fridge would move. I even thought that my apartment was probably being haunted by a ghost, until one day after an audition, I come home and I find that my Part 2, Stalker story time. So I come home and I notice that my fridge has moved again, and I know this because I put it back and it was moved another 2 tiles, which is about 2 feet. So I quickly call the landlord and I say to her, can you please check any cameras if you guys have any? And lo and behold, she said, yes, we do have security cameras. Let's check right now. Come over to my place. So I run over to her apartment. She starts pulling up footage from that same day, but it's taking very long, and I ask her to actually check footage from the past few weeks so that I can see if anyone had been in my apartment the first time. So she pulls up the camera pointing to my hallway, but unfortunately the quality was so blurry and my door was just outside of the scope of the lens. Either way, I could still get kind of a glimpse. So she fast forwards through a few hours, and finally I see a shadow. I tell her to stop and rewind and slow it down. And what I see literally made me poo my pants. Someone in a green shirt was right outside of my door and you could barely see their shoulder. Part 3, Stalker story time. At the corner of the screen, I see there's a green shirt and it's like the shoulder of someone, and it seems like they just disappeared into the door. Of course, I instantly started to freak out. Can you guys imagine seeing that? I was hyperventilating. I started to cry and she was trying to calm me down. Just to be safe, she called the owner of the building and asked if they had sent a repairman. They said no. Of course, I called the police. They said if there was no immediate physical danger, they couldn't come. So they didn't. Of course, I installed cameras. I had an app so that I could check everything remotely whenever I was out of my apartment, and I never saw anything. After that, I would put the coffee table and a dresser in front of the door so that I could make sure nobody would come in while I was sleeping. I was very paranoid the whole time. I would cry every single day. To this day, I still don't know who it was. I don't know if they took anything. I don't know if they put anything in. I think after that time, they did not come back in, but obviously I did move out a month later. It was very scary. I started taking kickboxing and I still take it to this day. I think self-defense is super important, especially if you live by yourself. Story time about how I found out my high school boyfriend was stalking me for weeks after we broke up. My junior year of high school, I had a super controlling and jealous boyfriend. He would get totally upset and jealous over the smallest thing, and he was so envious of my modeling and acting career. He also tried to control my social life. I couldn't have friends, and I never went out. If I had a photo shoot, he always insisted on going. My family hated the way he treated me. He was also just angry and upset all the time, so even when we hung out, it wasn't a fun time. I decided to break up with him over the phone because I knew if I did it in person, he would have made a scene. Of course, he begged me not to break up with him. I told him I just couldn't handle his jealousy and his envy. He really couldn't take no for an answer, so he would show up to my house and beg me to go for car rides with him because he just wanted to talk. I always said no because I was scared of him. I also called my family's house to see if I was there or not. One day I was driving home from school and I noticed he was right behind me. I texted him to stop following me. He said, "I'm not behind you, that's not me." I literally pulled over, and when I did that, he sped off. Later, he came to my house and tried to force me into his car. Come back for part 2. So my jealous and controlling ex-boyfriend shows up to my house. Mind you, he had been following me the entire day, and when I told him to stop following me, he said it wasn't him. I heard his car pull up. I went outside and I told him politely to please leave. That's when he grabbed my arm and pulled me towards his car. I opened his car door and literally tried to throw me inside the car. I put my feet up against the car and I pushed myself as hard as I could. I was not going to let him force me into that car. When he saw how hard I was fighting, he started to cry and he said, "Why can't we just take a ride and talk?" I told him there was nothing to talk about and that he needed to just let me go. He said, "You can't get rid of me that easily." Then he sped off in his car. At the time, I was working at a cafe near my house. So I show up to my job the next day and my boss tells me to go into her office right away. She pulls up camera security footage of the restaurant and then she says, "Tell me if you recognize anyone." Guess who I see? My ex-boyfriend looking through the window 2 hours before the restaurant even opened. Then he went to his car and sat there until I arrived, and when he saw my car pull up, he left really fast. When my shift was over, I walked to my car and I can see my ex hiding behind the tree next to my car. I'm back for part 3, it's scary. My crazy jealous ex had been stalking me for days and I could see him hiding behind a tree next to my car. I run back into my job and I tell my boss right away. She calls the cops, but they say they can't come unless I've been physically threatened. The rest of the week, I noticed him following me to school and wherever I would go. Saturday comes around and I go back to my job. Once again, my boss tells me to go into her office because she has something to show me. She pulls up more camera security footage and shows me that my boyfriend had been going to my job every single day before it opened to see if I was there. And he would stay for hours waiting in his car. I felt so sick to my stomach. When I get home, I tell my mom everything and then she calls his mom. Well, his mom took his phone and his car away. It was the only way to stop him from following me. Finally, he left me alone. A few years later, I found out he became really good friends with my brother. Came home from school one summer, and he actually tried to kiss me in the kitchen several times, and I told him no. He didn't speak to me after that. Here's a story time of how I caught my ex with another girl at a bar. And no, this is not my celebrity ex. So this guy and I had been together for quite a few years, and we had a lot of trust in the relationship, but I was visiting my family in Florida. He was in New York, where we lived. And he tells me that he's going to go have dinner with this mutual friend of ours who is a girl. He's hung out with her before. I know her, and she studied at the same school that we studied in, so I didn't think anything of it, and I just said, fine. He said they were going to have dinner, so about 8 hours passed, and I realized I hadn't heard from him in those 8 hours, so I text him, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Are you home? So he says, yes, I'm actually home now, and I tell him, so what were you guys doing for 8 hours? And he says, we had dinner, we were talking a lot, and blah, 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 blah. And I just want to say I wasn't jealous at all in the relationship. We had a lot of trust, so we never checked each other's locations. But this time my instinct told me different. So, of course, I went and I checked his location. He must have forgotten that we had our locations turned on. So guess what? Part 3 of how I caught my ex with another girl at a bar. So I can see from his location that he is now 2 blocks away from the apartment. So he calls me and pretends like nothing happened. And I said to him, hey, look, here are all the screenshots, take a look and explain yourself. He knows he got caught at this point, so he started crying, hyperventilating, almost having a panic attack, and he always did this whenever I got upset at him. I decided to grill him anyway. He begins to explain that he was having dinner with her and they then decided to go to a bar because they were having such a great time, and that he didn't want to tell me that he was at a bar because he thought that I would get suspicious. And I said, well, why would you do that instead of just telling me the truth when that would not have upset me? What upsets me is that I caught you lying to me and that you're at a bar in Brooklyn with some other girl. I definitely lost my trust and I told him to send me a statement of the bar, a bank statement, anything that proved that he was at this bar at that time, which he didn't. Of course, yeah, we're no longer together. Yeah.
Am I the asshole for flipping out at my husband for lying to my boss and telling him that I had a miscarriage? Disclaimer, this is not my story. I, 29 female, found out that I'm pregnant recently. I work a full-time job and so I'm fairly busy. Unlike my husband, 31 male, who only works part-time and he has plenty of time to spare. He visits his family almost daily. He also complains about how I keep missing events that I think aren't relevant because my in-laws literally have a party every week. He told me that his mom has picked up on my absence and said that it's affecting how she sees me and the way I prioritize work over family. I had this conversation with him and his mom 100 times, but with no success. Last week, he wanted me to attend his cousin's gender reveal, but I refused because I had work. He told me to take the day off, but that was impossible due to how much work I needed to get done. He had a hissy fit saying that I'm prioritizing work over family, and got mad when I told him that a relative's gender reveal party wasn't that important to attend. Am I the asshole for flipping out at my husband for lying to my boss and telling him that I had a miscarriage? Disclaimer, this is not my story. The next day, without my knowledge, he sent my boss a text using my phone pretending to be me, telling him that I was at the hospital because I was having a miscarriage. I couldn't believe it, and for a minute I thought it was a joke. My boss didn't even know I was pregnant and I didn't want to tell him or the others until later on. I shouted for my husband to come in the room and explain what the hell was going on. He said he did it as a desperate attempt to get me to get some time off work and actually focus on what matters. I flipped out and told him that this was my livelihood he was trying to mess with, but he said I basically made him resort to this. And that he wouldn't have to lie if I actually made some time to see and interact with his family. I yelled at him asking how I was going to deal with this ridiculous lie he told my boss. He said it was easy, all I had to do was say it was a miscarriage scare. We argued more and I told him I wasn't going to his cousin's party after this. He called me selfish and told me to look at the mirror and see who the one who was in the wrong here. Am I the asshole for not skipping my golf trip for my girlfriend's sister's wedding? Disclaimer, this is not my story. I, 26 male, have been dating PJ, 27 female, for right around a year, but we've been friends 8 years before we started dating. I'm a huge golfer, and due to the pandemic and a move across the country, I haven't seen my friends in over 2 years. We made a plan a year ago to go on a golfing trip together. Everything is paid for, about $1,000 in total for flights, hotels, and all golfing expenses. It has been a big deal for our group. PJ has a sister that I don't get along with at all. When we first met, it was fine. She was just a very entitled person. Her husband at the time was well off, so she was a trophy wife and never worked. Then we realized we had different political ideals, and this led to some heated conversations. I tried to avoid them, but Erin, PJ's sister, would always go at me. I got sick of it and started ignoring her completely. Am I the asshole for not skipping my golf trip for my girlfriend's sister's wedding? Disclaimer, this is not my story. The final straw came when Erin got divorced. Erin's ex-husband was fooling around with one of Erin's friends. So she started spending more time at our place. I'd come home and she'd be there already with my girlfriend. Erin started telling me that I needed to work harder at work to earn more money. She said it was unfair that PJ had to work when I should be providing for both of us. I said, well, that's your opinion. Personally, I always want whoever I'm with to financially add to the household. I don't want a trophy wife. She laughed and said that was ridiculous and how were we going to raise kids? I kind of snapped and said, well, Erin, your husband provided for you, then cheated on you, so if you don't mind, I'll probably take relationship advice from someone else. This started a huge argument and we haven't spoken since. She moved a few states away and is now engaged again. PJ is trying to get me to go, but the wedding is the same weekend as my golfing trip. I told her that I wouldn't be going, but she's demanding that I go with her.